My son told me to sleep in the shed. He said I was used to being alone. He didn't shout. He didn't look angry. He just pointed to the back and walked away like it didn't matter. That night, I lay on a wooden bench, covered in an old rug that smelled like dirt and paint thinner. No blanket, no pillow, no light, just me, the cold air, and the sound of laughter coming from the warm house I helped build. He didn't check on me. He didn't care if I was okay. And I didn't say a word. But when I woke up, the house was empty. I picked up the deed and walked away. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. Like a door closing for the last time. That shed had no insulation, no lock, just walls full of spiders and dust. But I didn't argue. I had already started counting the days he treated me like nothing. It began when my wife passed and I had nowhere else to go. He said I could stay for a while, just until I got back on my feet. I didn't know a while meant sleeping in a laundry room for 6 months, then getting moved to a shed when his wife's cousin came to visit. They never asked me what I needed. They never said thank you. But I kept doing things around the house. I fixed the roof. I painted the hallway. I even paid their electric bill without saying anything. They just smiled and called it good timing. My meals were always the leftovers they didn't want. My clothes were washed only when they remembered. My birthday passed without a word. I was there, but invisible. They walked past me like I was just part of the wall. Even the dog stopped wagging its tail at me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just remembered. I remembered every time I paid for my son's schooling. Every night I stayed awake to care for him when he was sick. Every shift I worked so he could have a better life. And now I was just a problem they wanted out of sight. The shed was their solution. A place to hide me. A way to say, "You're not welcome here," without using the words. But they forgot something important. I still had the deed. The land, the house, everything. It was all in my name. They never asked. They never looked. They thought old meant powerless. They thought kindness meant weakness. They were wrong. After that night in the shed, I didn't go back inside the house. Not because I wasn't allowed, but because I no longer wanted to. I had reached the point where silence said more than any words could. Every morning I woke up before they did. I washed my face with water from the outdoor tap and straightened the rug I had folded around me the night before. I sat on a broken chair near the shed door and watched the sunrise while they slept in comfort under my roof. And every evening, I stood near the garden, looking at the lights turning on one by one in the house that used to feel like a home. It didn't make me sad. It made me clear. Everything had changed, but they hadn't noticed. They had no idea I was keeping track of the way I was being treated. The house they mocked me in was still tied to my name. The kitchen where they whispered about how I was too old to be around was still my responsibility on the tax papers. They thought I was just a burden, but in truth, I had all the power. I was just quiet with it. It didn't start in the shed. It started the day my son got married. That was the first day I noticed the shift. She smiled at me like she was doing me a favor. She called me sweet in a tone that made it sound like I was simple. At the wedding, I sat in the back row even though I had helped pay for half of it. They didn't introduce me to her family. They didn't even save me a seat at the table with the rest of the close relatives. I ate my meal next to the coat rack while they toasted each other. I kept thinking it was a mistake, that maybe they had forgotten in the stress of the day. But the forgetting never stopped. Over the next year, they forgot to tell me about birthdays. Forgot to ask if I needed groceries. Forgot that I still woke up every morning and made their life easier. I fixed broken steps, changed light bulbs, handled the bills that came in late. I never asked for anything. I thought they'd remember on their own. But instead, they remembered only when something needed to be done. The faucet was leaking? Ask me. The car wouldn't start? Ask me. A package needed to be picked up? Ask me. But if I sat at the table too long, they looked uncomfortable. If I turned the TV too loud, they exchanged glances. If I walked into the room while their friends were over, she got quiet, like I was some ghost interrupting the life they built. And still, I said nothing. Not because I was afraid, but because I was preparing. I remembered every slight, Every moment they talked around me instead of to me. Every time they laughed when I mentioned something old-fashioned. I remembered how they rolled their eyes when I offered advice. How they pretended not to hear me when I asked if they needed anything from the store. I remembered it all. And I remembered it quietly. They never knew I still owned the property. When I sold my old house, I used the money to buy this one. But I never put it in their name. They asked if I wanted to stay with them for a while, and I agreed. But I paid for the place. I signed the mortgage. I held the keys, the papers, the proof. They were just tenants pretending to be owners. But tenants forget their place when no one reminds them. My son never asked about the deed. He just assumed it was his. He thought because he cut the grass once a month or put up a painting, he owned the walls. But you can't own something built on someone else's sacrifice. The day they gave me the shed, I stopped pretending. I took the deed out from the envelope I had hidden in the lining of my suitcase. I unfolded it with slow hands and stared at the signature that still mattered. Mine. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to warn them. I just needed to wait. Waiting became my strength. Every evening, I watched them live their lives like they had no past. Like the man who raised him didn't exist anymore. She spoke loudly on the phone about remodeling the bathroom, replacing the floorboards, tearing out the garden to make space for a hot tub. I sat in that same garden, planting tomatoes with my bare hands, and smiled. Because every dream they built was resting on land they didn't own. I could feel the moment coming, like a storm in the bones. It would happen fast, but I wasn't going to rush it. I wanted them to think they had won. That I had been pushed so far out of the picture that I would never return. I wanted them to forget who paid the bills. I wanted them to ignore the letters that still arrived in my name. I wanted them to feel safe, comfortable, careless. Because the thing about people who feel comfortable is, they get sloppy. They forget to lock doors. Forget to read the fine print. Forget that comfort is earned, not inherited. And while they forgot, I remembered. I remembered the way my son used to hold my hand when he was scared of the dark. I remembered the way he cried when I missed his school play because of an overtime shift. I remembered the way he said, "I'll never leave you," the day his mother died. And now, here I was, sleeping in a shed because my presence ruined their dinner plans. But I wasn't angry. I was awake. I was seeing them clearly for the first time. The people who lived in my house were not family anymore. They were strangers dressed in borrowed love, and the rent was long overdue. They had no idea what I was planning, and that was the best part. Every day, I watched them walk around the house like they owned it. Her voice echoed through the halls with instructions for new curtains and paint swatches. His voice, my son's voice, barely spoke to me at all. He passed by me like I was part of the scenery. He used to call me Dad with warmth. Now, if he said anything, it was dry and mechanical, like I was an old tenant overstaying my welcome. I heard them talk through the walls, whispering about how I should be placed in a care home soon. She was tired of the smell, she said. He agreed. They spoke like I couldn't hear, like I wasn't just one wall away. I heard her say she didn't like the idea of old people near her new baby when the time came. She didn't want the child growing up with that kind of energy in the house. They didn't know I was still the one paying the property tax. They didn't know the name on every legal document wasn't theirs. It was mine. They just assumed the world would hand them what they never earned. My presence was inconvenient to their image. She wanted guests to see a perfect home, not a reminder of where it came from. He just wanted peace, and to him, I was noise. But I never argued. Not once. I played the part. I stayed quiet, out of the way. I listened. I watched. I remembered. When the shed door wouldn't close one night from the wind, I stayed awake till morning to keep it from banging. When I caught a cold from the draft, I coughed quietly into my shirt so they wouldn't hear. I didn't want pity. I didn't want attention. I wanted clarity. And every shiver, every cough, every ignored ache made my memory sharper. I remembered how I signed the papers for this house with a shaking hand after my wife died, because I thought starting over would help my son move on. I remembered how I didn't buy anything for myself that year, just to afford this place. I remembered how I told them not to worry about rent, not to worry about ownership, that I just wanted them to feel safe. They thanked me once. Then they moved on. The thank you faded. The respect followed. Soon I became part of the furniture. Then I became the dust on it. The day I knew things were beyond repair wasn't the day they put me in the shed. It was the day I overheard her say, "He's not going to be around much longer anyway." She laughed. My son didn't. But he didn't correct her either. That silence was my answer. He wouldn't protect me. He wouldn't defend me. He wouldn't remember me, and I realized something important. I didn't need him to. I had already done enough. I had already given more than they deserved. What I needed now was closure. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg to be seen. I was going to end the chapter myself, quietly, completely, permanently. I made a list in my mind. A step-by-step plan. Everything would change, but it would look like it happened overnight. No fights, no drama, just action. I waited for the right moment. I listened for patterns. I watched the days they left early and returned late. I checked the mail. I watched the utility notices. I stayed invisible while gathering everything I needed. They never noticed the way I paced the yard every evening. They never saw me measuring the time it took for them to back out of the driveway. They didn't see me wake up at 4 a.m. to check the street for cameras. They didn't know I walked 2 miles to the county office just to get updated paperwork. They didn't even know the locks could be changed with one phone call. I was the ghost in their story, and I let them believe it, because the less they noticed me, the easier it was to finish what they started. She kept making comments. He kept laughing weakly, unsure of whether to defend me or just stay quiet. But the thing about silence is, it's not neutral. When you stay silent while someone is being disrespected, you're part of the problem. And he became part of the problem long before the shed. He allowed the disrespect to grow. He let the warmth between us die. And when you let love die, you can't be surprised when what's left becomes cold. I didn't hate them. I just stopped loving them the way I used to. My love had turned into responsibility. And responsibility, once taken for granted, becomes weight. And I was tired of carrying them. I had carried him since he was a boy. Through broken bones, through late-night fevers, through his first heartbreak. I carried him through my grief, through my financial strain, through every sacrifice no one saw. And now he carried nothing, not even guilt. I saw it in his eyes, the emptiness, the belief that he deserved comfort at someone else's expense. He didn't think twice when I was put outside. He didn't think twice when I stopped eating meals inside. He didn't think twice when I disappeared from the photos on the wall. But he would think. Soon. I was almost ready. The papers were in order. The locks were scheduled. The notice was typed. I just needed to wait for one more moment. The perfect opportunity to turn silence into justice. Not revenge, justice. Because revenge is about pain. But justice is about balance. And balance is what they took from me when they decided my life didn't matter. I didn't need to prove myself. I just needed to remember that I still existed. That I still had power. That this house, my house, was not a gift to them. It was a loan. And loans come due. They forgot that. I didn't. I remembered everything. It didn't happen overnight, the death of respect. It came in layers, like dust settling on something once cherished. I used to think love was enough to hold people together, but I learned that memory fades faster when it's inconvenient. They didn't remember the cold winters I paid for the heat. They didn't remember the late nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home safely. They didn't remember the meals I made, the birthdays I planned, the quiet sacrifices I made just so they could live a life without struggle. They only remembered what was easy, what made them feel good, what placed them in the center. I watched her redecorate the living room like she was the one who built it. I saw her toss my old furniture out without asking, replacing it with pieces that matched her style. She didn't ask where the money came from. She didn't ask if I wanted to keep anything. My son just stood beside her, helping carry the boxes out like the past meant nothing. I didn't protest. I let them erase me in plain sight. That's the mistake they made. Confusing silence with weakness. Every time they pushed me further away, they thought I was fading. But in truth, I was sharpening, cutting ties in my mind, watching everything with eyes wide open. When they took down the photo of my wedding day, I stood at the doorway and watched. She held the frame like it was a dusty relic. He didn't stop her. She set it on the floor beside the trash. My life, my history, discarded like garbage. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't part of their future. I was a placeholder in their present, tolerated only until they figured out how to remove me completely. But they had already removed me in every way that counted. They ate dinner without inviting me. They spoke about plans that didn't include me. They laughed at jokes I didn't understand. I had become a background noise to their carefully curated life. And yet, every month, I made sure the mortgage was paid. Every quarter, I checked the property taxes. Every insurance document still had my name at the top. I was the foundation they walked on, and they forgot the ground could shift. I began removing my things from the house quietly. One by one, I folded my clothes into the suitcase I had brought with me when I moved in. I gathered old letters, photos, anything they might claim later just to rewrite the past. I stored it all in a second suitcase beneath the floorboards of the shed. They never noticed. They never came to check. They never asked if I needed anything. They thought because I didn't make noise, I didn't matter. But I had been invisible long before the shed. This just made it easier for them to ignore me completely. I started taking long walks into town again. Not because I needed anything, but because it reminded me of who I was before this house, before the silence, before the betrayal. I walked past the bakery where I used to take my son as a boy. I stood outside the hardware store where I taught him how to pick out the right tools. I passed the church where we used to light candles for his mother. And everywhere I walked, I remembered. Not just the good, but the weight of how much I gave, and how little of it remained. They had turned me into a ghost while still breathing. But ghosts remember. Ghosts haunt. Ghosts don't forget the shape of a door or the weight of a deed, and the deed still had my name. Every evening, I returned from my walks and watched them through the window. They never pulled the curtains shut. They had stopped noticing me long ago. She danced in the kitchen sometimes, cooking food she never offered me. He sat on the couch with his feet up, scrolling through his phone, laughing at things I'd never see. They lived like I didn't exist. Like the man sitting 20 feet away in a cold shed was a stranger who just happened to share their backyard. And maybe I was a stranger now. Because the man they used to know, the one who would have done anything for them, was gone. They buried him the day they gave him the shed. I let them think they won. I let them believe I was broken. But broken things don't stay still. They shift. They cut. They reshape. And I was reshaping. Every quiet moment became strength. Every insult became fuel. Every night I spent alone became another brick in the wall I was building between us. A wall they would never climb again. I started calling lawyers. Quietly. Carefully. I asked questions they didn't think I could ask. I reviewed the ownership documents. I confirmed my authority. I confirmed my rights. I confirmed the timeline for eviction, should I choose to use it. I didn't need to say a word. The law was on my side. The house was mine. They were tenants in name only, squatters in behavior, strangers in spirit. I even spoke with the power company, the water board, the city clerk. Every account was still in my control. They had just never bothered to check. Because people who feel entitled rarely read the fine print. They think the world owes them what others built. And they don't realize the world can take it back. I made no threats. I gave no warnings. I smiled when she passed me in the yard. I nodded when he mumbled good morning. I kept the peace. Because peace was the most dangerous thing I could offer. It made them relax. It made them comfortable. It made them blind. And blindness was all I needed. One more mistake. One more oversight. One more moment of arrogance. And I would be ready to act. They say some people burn bridges. Others build them just to watch you walk away. But I had stopped building. I wasn't trying to connect anymore. I wasn't trying to heal. I wasn't trying to make them see me. I had done that for too long. Now, I was just preparing the ground for absence. A clean break, not with a bang, but with the kind of silence that follows a vanishing. The kind that haunts. The kind that lingers. I timed their routines down to the minute. She left every morning at 9:12. He followed at 9:27. Their returns were rarely before 6. They never locked the back gate. They thought no one would bother with it. They thought no one was watching. But I was. I watched everything. I knew where the cameras didn't reach. I knew where the spare keys were kept. I knew which drawers they stuffed their unopened mail in, the ones they never sorted. I knew they hadn't seen the new envelope that came addressed to me, marked in red, stamped urgent. Because I took it first. I knew what was coming, and they didn't. I tested the locks quietly one day while they were out. The keys still worked. I oiled the hinges of the shed door to make sure it wouldn't squeak when I left. I cleaned out the dirt beneath the floorboards and tucked my suitcases tighter, ready to move. I had no plan to take anything else, just my name, my proof, and my silence. I watched the weather, waited for the day the rain would fall just heavy enough to cover the sound of movement. I chose a Thursday. No deliveries scheduled, no appointments on the shared calendar she kept on the fridge. No visitors expected, just a normal, quiet Thursday, one that would become the last normal day they'd ever have in that house. That morning, I woke up early. I folded the blanket they let me keep, placed it neatly in the corner of the shed. I dusted the old photograph frame I had kept hidden, the one with me, my wife, and a younger version of my son smiling with pride. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I felt nothing but clarity, the kind that comes after you've reached your limit. I left the shed door slightly open. The rain was falling in soft sheets, tapping the tin roof gently like a warning. They left on schedule. Didn't glance back, didn't check the backyard, didn't pause. They were so used to forgetting I existed, they didn't notice the air had changed. I stepped out, steady, dry under the awning, and walked to the back door. My key still turned. The lock still clicked. The warmth of the house hit me like a betrayal. Familiar, once comforting, now foreign. I walked through the rooms slowly. My shoes didn't make a sound. The furniture was different. The smells were different. But I remembered where everything used to be, where my wife sat, where my son took his first steps, where we laughed once, where silence eventually settled like a fog. I didn't touch anything. I just looked. Not because I missed it, but because I was saying goodbye. I went upstairs, to the room they said was too cramped for guests, the same room they promised would always be mine. It was filled with storage bins now. Forgotten things. Dusty plastic. A broken chair. My name was still on one of the boxes, an old label with my handwriting. They never even peeled it off, just buried it beneath their new life. I walked back down, into the office, opened the drawer with the mail they never sorted, found unopened letters, bills, updates, notices, and right there, the updated property deed. They hadn't even opened it. My name, my authority, my right. Untouched, ignored. I tucked it in my coat. I opened the hallway closet, checked the breaker box. Still in my name. Still mine. I turned to the kitchen, wrote a single note on a piece of paper. I waited for you to remember. You didn't. I placed it on the table. Then I walked out the front door, locked it from the inside, called the locksmith, asked them to meet me at noon. By 12:45, the locks had been changed. The codes reset. The garage opener wiped. The shed was empty. The yard was clean. I stood in the window of the living room and waited. 5:57. Her car pulled into the driveway. 6:09. His followed. They got out, talking, laughing, holding takeout bags. She carried new clothes in one hand, keys in the other. He looked at his phone, typing something fast. I watched them try the front door. First casual, then confused, then irritated. I saw their expressions change from mild annoyance to panic. The key didn't work. The code didn't work. Nothing worked. She rang the doorbell. He knocked. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't open the curtain. I just stood in the hallway, hidden, listening. Their voices grew louder, her tone shrill, his more panicked, then quieter, then angry, then silent. He tried calling my phone. I had turned it off. She banged on the door, screaming something I couldn't make out. I waited. After 20 minutes, they left. Drove away without looking back. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just sat down in the same chair they once said didn't match the decor. I sat in silence. I breathed. I existed. For the first time in a long time, I existed. That night was the first in months I slept in a real bed. The mattress was firm, the sheets smelled like detergent she liked, not mine. The bedroom was cold. I didn't adjust the thermostat. I let the chill sit in the air. It reminded me of the months in the shed. I laid on my back, hands folded across my chest, and stared at the ceiling. The silence inside the house was heavier than the silence outside had ever been, because this silence had an echo of everything that had been taken for granted. I heard her voice in my head, sharp and careless, calling the shed temporary. I heard his footsteps on the stairs when he didn't knock. I remembered the night I coughed and no one came. I remembered the days I didn't eat and no one asked. They thought they were building a life, but they were just stripping away their roots. And now that the ground was gone, there was nothing for them to stand on. In the morning, I made tea. Just 1 cup. I used the chipped mug they never threw away because they never noticed it was still there. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the sunrise through the window. The light fell on the living room rug she picked. On the frame of the mirror, he hung crooked but never fixed. On the dust on the bookshelf. They were good at decoration but careless with detail. They missed the small things, and the small things added up. I opened the front door and found the letter. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of paper with her handwriting, scribbled like she wrote it in the car. Please talk to us. That was all it said. I closed the door and placed it on the counter. It wasn't an apology. It was a plea. But not for me. For the comfort I once brought. For the warmth I used to offer. For the man who solved things, paid things, fixed things. Not for the man I had become. They wanted the version of me that helped them ignore the cost of their choices. They didn't want to talk. They wanted access. They didn't want to see me. They wanted what I gave. I walked through the house again. This time, I noticed the marks on the wall from where they moved furniture. The scuffs on the baseboards. The burnt spot on the counter where someone left a pot too long. Signs of their carelessness. Their rushed lives. Their belief that someone else would always clean up after them. I found more unopened mail. Letters with my name. Notices about utilities. They had never even looked at the fine print. I found the insurance policy tucked in a drawer with fast food receipts. My signature. My payments. My responsibility. Their lives had been built on the foundation I maintained, even as they tried to erase me. I walked to the shed, opened the door, empty, cold. I stepped inside and stood there for a while, not in mourning, but in recognition. This was where they thought I belonged. This was what they thought was enough. I left the door open when I walked back. Let the wind blow through it. Let the dust carry out whatever was left of me in that space. I spent the next 2 days in silence. No calls, no texts, just letters. From them. Slipped under the door, taped to the gate. One said, "We didn't mean it like that." Another said, "You're still our father." The last one said, "Can we come home?" That word, home, hit like ice, because what they called home was a place I protected while they watched me freeze outside of it. It wasn't home to me anymore. It was just a structure filled with choices I didn't make. And now they wanted back in. They didn't ask where I slept when the nights were below freezing. They didn't ask what I ate when the pantry was locked. They didn't ask if I was okay. But now, when the locks were changed and the heat was mine again, now they asked. Now they cared, or at least pretended to. I called the lawyer. I asked what my options were. He said, "You're within every right to file formal eviction if you wish." Legally, they abandoned residence. That word, abandoned, sat with me. Because they had done just that. Abandoned more than walls. They abandoned memory, loyalty, gratitude. I told him I'd think about it. That evening, a neighbor came to the door. She said she saw them sleeping in their car 2 blocks over, said they looked tired, said maybe they were going through something. I nodded, thanked her, closed the door. I didn't explain, because there was nothing to explain. The consequences they faced weren't sudden. They were earned, over months of silence, absence, neglect. I thought about calling them, just once, to say something final. But what do you say to people who knew better and still chose worse? What do you offer to those who had everything and gambled it for pride? I chose not to speak, because silence was the only language they taught me to understand. I began packing my things, the things I cared about, the photo of my wife, the letters she wrote, my books, my clothes. I left the rest. The house didn't feel like mine either. It was too full of their noise, their shadows. I decided to sell it. Quietly, efficiently. I already had the papers. I already had the deed. I already had a buyer in mind. Someone who didn't need it to be a home, just a property, a transaction. I would take the money. I would disappear. I would leave behind nothing but the memory of a man who once stood at the edge of their lives and waited to be let back in, before realizing the door had always been locked from the inside. I didn't tell them the house was already listed. I didn't tell them the buyer was already confirmed. I didn't tell them the papers were signed while they were still begging through messages they hoped I'd read, because they weren't asking for me. They were asking for comfort, warmth, stability. Things they discarded the second I became inconvenient. I spent those days cleaning quietly. Not because I cared about the space, but because I needed closure. Every cabinet I wiped reminded me of the meals they never invited me to. Every drawer I emptied held receipts, old takeout menus, and notes with to-do lists that never included me. It was like sorting through the ruins of a life I'd been locked out of, even while living inside it. I folded the few things they left behind. Her scarf, his tool set, a pair of baby shoes from a child they hadn't yet had but hoped for. I didn't throw them away. I placed them in a box and left it in the center of the living room floor, a museum of their own neglect. Each item whispered, "We thought we had time." But time wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to me again. And I wasn't wasting it. I started keeping a notebook, something private. A place to write down every time I remembered a moment they looked through me. Every holiday I spent alone in their house. Every chore I completed without thanks. Every ache I felt in silence. I filled 3 pages before realizing I didn't need to keep going. The damage was done. The truth was clear. They had chosen comfort over character, and now they wanted to borrow mine again. The texts kept coming. She sent pictures of them outside the house. Him asleep in the car. Her with her knees tucked up on the passenger seat, eyes red. "Please," one message said. "We made a mistake." But mistakes are accidents. This wasn't. This was deliberate, calculated, cold. Like the floor of the shed that night. Like the way he looked at me when he handed me the blanket and turned his back. I sat in the same chair I used to rock him in as a child. The one with the scuffed armrest from when he used to teeth on it. I ran my fingers across it now and felt nothing. No pain, no sadness. Just absence. Like he had already been gone for years, and the body that remained was just a hollow version wearing his name. They asked if we could talk. I didn't answer. They left voicemails. I didn't listen. They knocked once. I didn't open the door. I heard them cry on the other side, but the shed didn't have a doorbell. The shed didn't have a heater. The shed didn't have comfort. I remembered that, and I let them sit in the same quiet they once gave me. They didn't know how to handle silence. They were used to shouting and quick fixes. But this wasn't a problem that could be fixed. It had already rotted through. And once trust is gone, it doesn't grow back. It collapses like a wall eaten by termites, silently, then all at once. I made tea that night, used the last of the honey I had bought when she was pregnant. She never knew it was from me. She thought it came in a gift basket. I watched the steam curl and disappear, like their chances. Like the apologies they never gave until it was too late. I wrote a letter of my own, not to them, to myself. A note that said, "You did your best. You gave everything. They chose themselves." I folded it, placed it on the kitchen table, and slept in the guest room, not the master bedroom, because I didn't want the place they called theirs. I didn't want anything they touched. I wanted to reclaim myself, not the house. I wanted to leave behind everything they associated with ownership. I wasn't proving anything anymore. I wasn't waiting to be seen. I was erasing them, inch by inch, from the space they once polluted with entitlement. The following morning, the real estate agent came. She took new pictures of the house, asked if I wanted to stage it with furniture or leave it as is. I said empty was fine. Empty felt honest. Honest like the way they'd left me in the shed. Honest like the way I'd stopped hoping they would change. I signed the final paper. She said the buyer was scheduled to take ownership next week. I nodded, said thank you. That was it. No fanfare. No moment of celebration. Just paperwork. The same kind of paperwork they never bothered to read. The deed, the mortgage, the name on the title. All the things that gave me the power they thought I didn't have. That evening, as the sun began to fall behind the trees, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch one last time. The wind was soft. The street was quiet. I looked at the driveway. Empty. Their car was gone. Whether they left to regroup or gave up trying, I didn't care. Because I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't the man who asked for respect. I was the man who took it back. Quietly, legally, completely. The mailbox still had their names written in faded marker. I peeled it off. Not in anger, in finality. Like removing a label from a box that no longer belonged. I made one last round of the house. Turned off the lights, closed the windows, locked the doors. I left the keys on the counter, beside the box of things they forgot, and I walked away. No note, no explanation, just absence. The kind that makes people remember. The kind that doesn't answer calls. The kind that changes locks and never looks back. The knock came at 6:03 a.m. Sharp, not loud, not rushed. Just 3 soft taps that barely echoed against the door I no longer owned. I watched them from across the street. They didn't know I was there. They looked tired, hair messy, eyes red. No car this time, just 2 people standing outside a house that didn't belong to them anymore. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I just watched. The real estate agent pulled up behind them. She didn't see me either. She stepped out with the new keys in hand and paused when she saw them on the porch. There was a brief moment of confusion, then silence, then realization. I could tell the exact second it hit them. Her shoulders dropped. His hands opened like he was about to catch something that never came. The agent spoke, probably politely, probably saying the house was sold, probably asking them to step aside so the new owners could view the place. They didn't argue. They just stood there, frozen, like time had stopped. But I kept walking, down the street, past the house, past the memories, past the shed. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because the image was already burned into my mind. Them standing on the porch of a house they thought would always be theirs. A house they filled with neglect. A house they forgot was never in their name. They had taken everything for granted, and now everything was gone. I didn't take their things. I left them. I didn't take their pride. They lost it. I didn't take revenge. I gave silence. And silence echoed louder than any scream. They called again that night, 37 times. Each missed call stacked on the last like bricks in a wall they couldn't break through. They didn't realize I had already changed my number, that I had packed up what little I needed, that I was already gone. The house now had someone else's name on the mailbox. The key no longer fit. Their fingerprints were erased from the glass. Their plans erased from the calendar. Their comfort stripped from the walls. They had taken me for granted. And now they were learning what absence really feels like. Not in theory, not in warning, but in finality. In a way that doesn't knock twice. In a way that doesn't answer questions. In a way that doesn't say goodbye. I stayed in a motel that night. Small room. Thin walls. But it was mine. I slept without fear of being moved. I woke up without guilt for existing. I sat with a cup of tea and didn't hear laughter behind closed doors that I wasn't allowed to enter. I didn't hear whispers. I didn't feel eyes watching me like I was a burden. For the first time in years, I was alone on purpose, and it felt good. They had taken that feeling from me. They had turned my existence into a shadow. But now, they were the ones outside in the dark. They were the ones wondering why things felt different. why the ground had shifted, why comfort had vanished like breath on glass. They would search their memories. They would reread their messages. They would replay every moment they ignored me, stepped over me, dismissed me. And none of it would change anything. Because the final decision wasn't theirs. It was mine. And I made it the moment he told me I could sleep in the shed. That I was used to being alone. That I didn't matter. That my presence was a problem. I made the choice to stop waiting. To stop hoping. To stop bleeding silently in the background of their lives. I made the choice to leave. And they would spend the rest of their lives learning what it meant to be left. I didn't celebrate. There wasn't any joy in what I'd done. No music, no victory, just peace. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself. I woke up the next morning in the motel and didn't check my phone. It wasn't even the same phone. I had replaced it, not out of spite, but because I didn't want their numbers anymore. I didn't want the messages. I didn't want to see their names light up on the screen and feel that old guilt rise again. I didn't owe them anything. I packed my things, a small bag, my documents, the notebook I had filled, and the folded letter I wrote to myself. I left the motel key on the table and walked out into a day that didn't feel heavy. I rented a small apartment 2 towns over. Nothing big, just enough for me. A warm bed, a quiet kitchen, a window that let in morning light. It didn't smell like memories. It didn't echo with past mistakes. It was blank, and blank felt good. I bought a coffee maker, not the expensive kind, just something simple. The kind no one would laugh at or call outdated. The kind that worked. I made coffee every morning and drank it slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't check the clock. I didn't feel the pressure to be out of the way. I existed, fully, quietly, on my own terms, and no one told me where to sleep. No one handed me a blanket like a favor. No one made me feel like a visitor in my own life. I took walks in the park, watched children play, saw couples argue, then laugh, saw old men feeding birds. I didn't need to talk to anyone. Just being near life again was enough. The silence in my apartment wasn't cold. It was calm. The kind that wraps around you and says, "This space belongs to you." I made dinner for myself. I even tried recipes I hadn't made in years. Food that reminded me of who I was before they took over my world. I didn't set an extra plate. I didn't expect a knock at the door. I didn't wait for anything. I simply lived. I kept the deed. Not because I wanted to frame it, but because it reminded me that I once had power, even when I felt powerless. I stored it in a folder in the bottom drawer of my new desk. Sometimes I looked at it, not to remember them, but to remember myself. The version of me that chose silence over shouting. The version that walked away instead of breaking down. I didn't tell anyone the full story. Not the neighbors. Not the woman at the coffee shop who always smiled when I came in. Not even the landlord who asked why I had perfect credit but no references. I just said, "I'm starting over." And that was enough. That was the truth. Some nights, I sat by the window and let the breeze drift in. I didn't need music. I didn't need TV. I didn't need distraction. I had spent so long surviving that being still felt like a luxury. I didn't check social media. I didn't scroll through old photos. I didn't wonder what they were doing now. Because it didn't matter. They had made their choices. And I had made mine. Mine led me here. To a place without raised voices or closed doors or cold sheds. A place where the floor was clean and the bed was warm and no one's presence made me feel small. A place where I could breathe without asking permission. They still tried to reach me, from what I heard. Mutual contacts said they were going through it, that they missed me, that they regretted everything. But regret doesn't build bridges, and I wasn't standing at the edge waiting for one. I had already crossed into something better, something quieter, something real. I didn't hate them. That would have taken too much energy. I just didn't need them. And maybe that's what hurt them most. Not the silence, but the fact that I wasn't hurting, that I had learned to live without them, that I wasn't waiting for them to come back. They had pushed me out of the house, out of the circle, out of the story. And now the story moved on without them. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the hero. I was just the one who chose not to be used again. The one who didn't yell. The one who didn't break things. The one who quietly packed a bag and walked into a better life. And that life was mine now. Fully. Finally. Without apology. I didn't answer their calls. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted to hurt them. But because there was nothing left to say. 37 times they tried to reach me. 37 times they pressed the same number that no longer belonged to me. That number had been mine when I was theirs. When I lived in the shadows of their convenience. When my sleep depended on their mercy and my meals came after their moods. But I wasn't theirs anymore. I wasn't the woman in the shed. I wasn't the leftover. I wasn't the problem to be managed. I was gone. Fully. Silently. Cleanly. They could leave 1,000 messages, but none would reach me. Not because the line was broken, but because I wasn't standing by the phone anymore. I was standing in sunlight, in a place where peace lived, in a place where I wasn't an afterthought. Every day since, I woke up with a steady heart. I didn't worry about being needed only when it was useful. I didn't wonder if I'd be in the way. I didn't question whether kindness would be returned. I didn't ask to be seen. Because I had already seen myself. And that was enough. I planted flowers on my windowsill. I grew tomatoes in a small pot. I painted the walls a color I liked. I cooked food that made the kitchen smell like joy. I walked without fear of being watched. I rested without guilt. I existed as I was, not waiting, not hoping, not aching. They had taken advantage of the quiet in me. But quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet means waiting. And when the wait is over, it doesn't come back. It doesn't knock again. It doesn't explain itself. It just moves on. That's what I did. Moved on. They'll tell the story differently, maybe. That I vanished. That I left without warning. That I was unfair. But they will never tell the part where I slept in the shed. They will never say out loud that they told me I was used to being alone. That they believed that made it acceptable. That they believed I'd stay. They'll rewrite the ending for sympathy. But the truth won't change. I didn't leave out of anger. I left out of certainty. I didn't slam the door. I just stopped standing in the cold. I didn't seek revenge. I just ended the story. The way it needed to end. The way it always ends. When silence becomes louder than words. When absence becomes the answer. When dignity returns like breath after suffocation. And in that ending, I found something I never expected. Not relief, not vengeance, not justice, but self. The self they ignored. The self I forgot. The self that finally said, enough, and never looked back.